Super nice to meet you, Jennifer. I really appreciate your work. Um, and I'm curious, like, why? Why were you a victim of bullying, or why did you get interested in this?
Well, it's a very good question. So, what happened was I was working at a university prep school and I heard from a parent. I got a frantic call from a parent. So, I'm a teacher at the school. I get a call from a parent saying that her son is texting her and he's saying he can't take it anymore. It's too much. They're calling us. And then he rattled off, and I won't use the direct language. You'll have to just fill in the blanks. But they're calling us effing pathetic and effing embarrassments and effing pussies and etc. And
Jeez.
we'd heard earlier in the year this same situation, but the expression was effing retards. And so I am the daughter of a lawyer. I am the granddaughter of a judge. My uncle's a lawyer. My
Mm,
mom is in, behind the scenes politics. I do everything by the book. I'm like I used to be, called goody two shoes as a kid because I was
mhm.
that obnoxious. So I do everything by the book, and I go to the secretary of the board of the school. I go to the headmaster. I meet with the headmaster. Yes, we're going to do all of these proper protocols. Well, of course, they don't. And the reason they don't is because it's not students bullying students, it's teachers.
No way.
It was teachers saying all of that. And basically, it was
And the
your,
institution covers down on these bad players, just like we've seen in some of the sex scandals and etc. It's
well,
horrible.
Canada, I mean, it's amazing to watch the sport crisis unfold because we're a society that seems to hold children to higher and higher and more stringent standards when it comes to conduct, and all we ever do with adults who display far worse behaviors, much more destructive behaviors. They're in positions of trust, authority, and power, and what do? We cover up what they've done and we enable them to keep doing it. So we have this kind of psychotic society unfolding, and I think everyone's feeling it. And
Right.
so, I mean, I'm a pretty, I understand that speaking up about this would end up being, hard on the school, hard on my colleagues, etc. But everybody has their line, and
Hmm.
my line that got crossed was my son was one of their victims.
Oh. Hmm.
So that's where I'm a researcher by trade. I'm an author. I'm an academic. So they started to tell me things like, "Oh, it's just old school coaching," and then when the government agencies empowered to protect children started saying things like, "Well, the students shouldn't have listened to the teachers' obscenities," I was like, "What?" Yeah,
What?
yeah. And the other thing that the
Insane.
Commissioner for Teacher Regulation said was the students are too sensitive. I was like,
Yes.
what?
It's
So
all
I
their fault.
literally,
It's
yeah,
all their fault. Yeah.
it was like being in Orwell's 1984. I was like,
Mm.
okay. So the way I sort things out for myself and try and get a grip on reality is research. So I was like, okay, that's what you guys are all saying. You're the powerful people. What does the
Mhm.
research say? And it couldn't be more diametrically opposed.
Mhm.
So they're trying to cover up and enable and victimize the students who reported. By the time there was at least 13, 14 students reporting that they wanted the abuse to stop. It was
Mhm.
basically the classic textbook scenario of fear, humiliation, and favoritism. And so, that's how bullies operate. It's well documented. That's what they were doing.
Mhm.
And the kids were like, no, we just want to play our sport. We actually want to
Mhm.
compete. We want to win. We want to give it our best. We want to work as a team. We don't want you dividing us. We don't
Was
want you. Mhm.
Sorry, Jennifer, was this all just in athletic arenas, or was it also happening in the classroom and other places?
Well, originally at the school, I repeatedly reported, along with other colleagues and parents and students, that there was a theater teacher. The head of the theater department was incredibly abusive. And
Mm.
they just totally covered that up and enabled it until the sports situation happened. And when I wrote my letter to them and said, if you don't address this, I'm resigning.
Mhm.
Um, the chairman of the board phoned me right up and said, and oh, sorry, I should have just backtracked. I said, I've watched what you're doing with theater. And so I don't think you're going to actually address this. I think you're just going to
Mhm.
do what you do with the theater abuse.
Mhm.
And so that, I picked up the phone and it's the chair of the board and he said, theater's being taken care of. And that teacher retired early, like
Mm.
really early. And that's how they do it in these in independent schools. There's, you know, if
But
there's
no acknowledgement,
no,
no
which is
repercussions. Interesting.
from a
Yeah.
from a brain point of view, that's really unhealthy
Mhm.
because basically you're telling the students that they're not being heard, that they
Right.
weren't heard, that they can now walk away with all the neurological scars they've got in their brains from this abusive individual. And the school is bending over backwards to ensure that the abusive individual is protected. So
Right.
it's very dangerous what we're doing with young people's brains right now. And
Right.
the statistic that best conveys this, and it's a tough one, but it's just come out from 2000 to 2018, youth suicide, that's 10-year-olds to 24-year-olds, has increased 57%.
Yeah. I've heard that. That's insane, and it's growing up since the pandemic for obviously other reasons, but it's a crisis. What is so talk about the effect that because when most people think, oh yeah, you were abused, now the abuse is gone, so everything's okay now. Not so, right? What's the effect of this abuse, and how long does it take for the effects to really kind of root themselves in traumatic brain symptoms?
What I learned in the research is we have a tendency in society, just as you said, Mark, we think that the body is now protected.
Right.
The young person no longer is exposed to the abuser, therefore the young person is fine.
Yeah,
And we
give them a
look at
couple therapy sessions and they'll be okay.
yeah, and we
Yeah.
look at their bodies and we look at them and they're successful, they're doing well in their
Hmm.
grades. Maybe they're struggling a bit, but basically they look fine, they look healthy. Well,
Hmm.
the research on these healthy young looking people shows that their brains are in serious trouble. And this is
Mm.
where as a society I'm excited and hopeful that we're kind of at a tipping point where we're going to make a shift, and this is really what I wanted to achieve with my book. I
Hmm.
want my reader to start thinking a lot more about their brain, seeing
Hmm.
their brain, shining a spotlight on their brain, understanding how their brain works. Because what's actually happened is that young person who was abused is got all kinds of damage, anatomical damage to their brain, potentially neurological scars. They might have all different distortions. Brains are very unique, so they absorb and they suffer the abuse differently. But the bottom line is it's invisible to us, so we ignore it. Even our doctors ignore it. Our even some of our mental health professionals, that they're not looking at the brain, and the brain will tell you very quickly on a non-invasive brain scan where some of the key problems lie.
Hmm. That's fascinating. And so, just to take this, another step further, what is the effect? Let's say I grow up in a family that had or I was at let's keep the school example. Let's say I had a coach who was abusive, and I was with that coach for 4 or 6 years or whatever, or different coaches. What's happening in my brain? And is it the same for all kids, or are there different manifestations of trauma?
There's different manifestations, absolutely, because there's many different complex factors. As a mental
Right.
health professional, we'll quickly identify and understand. I mean, how you react to an educator who's abusing you is going to depend on your relationship to your parents. It'll
Yep.
hinge on
Makes
your
sense.
relationship to other teachers. It'll depend on your genetic makeup and the resilience of, you know, your own neural networks. It can
If
depend
you
on
got trauma in other areas of your life, it's just going to compound, right, and make
it's
it
going
more
to compound
complex.
for sure. So, I mean, if you imagine a child in that situation, one of the things that's really worrisome in the long term is they end up normalizing the abuse. So, oftentimes, an educator who's abusing, or even a doctor, like if you look at Dr. Larry Nassar, he would co opt the parent. He would normalize his abuse by doing it in front of a parent in the room so
Mm.
that the kid would think, oh, my parent is not reacting to this authority, this medical expert knows what he's doing. I must just trust that this, even though it feels like a violation, isn't. So you can see how the brain is starting to normalize incredibly abnormal, unhealthy behaviors.
Hmm.
Also, if let's say you're one of in the classic bullying dynamic, there will be targets and then there will be the favored ones. The favored ones are
Hmm.
all designed to make the targets make it seem like it's their fault. Not
Hmm.
everyone's being slammed with this kind of behavior. Therefore, the ones that are must deserve it. The fault
Mm.
lies with them. They need to be treated this way. And then the favored ones are the ones also who will jump to the defense of the abusive individual. We see this
Hmm.
again and again.
Hmm.
So imagine that what's happening to the student that's the favored student, they're losing empathy. With every single
Hmm.
time that the abusive individual does their abuse, they're shutting down the empathy neural networks that should be saying, this is awful. This student's being publicly shamed. This student's being grabbed
Mm.
and yelled at in the face. This student's being, put down and humiliated. And instead of the normal
Wow.
reaction, their brain is stifling that natural empathy network. Very, very destructive. I mean, if you look at
Mm.
jobs, and especially leadership jobs and professional jobs, they're always asking for someone with empathy, with social emotional skills, with empathy, because it is what's successful in the workplace.
Hmm.
So those unfortunate young people are having their neural networks really damaged. Now, what's fascinating to me is when they look at very extreme examples of people that have suffered. So for example, there's a UK study on prisoners who are murderers. And when they looked at their brains on brain scans, they found that their amygdala, so that's the part of the brain that's sort of the alarm center or the threat
Right.
detection center. It does many, many things. The brain
Hmm.
always is working together, but for the sake of this study and for us talking, let's
Hmm.
isolate that part of the brain. And they found that the amygdala of a murderer is very enlarged. Well,
Mm.
makes a lot of sense. You don't become a murderer by growing up in a healthy, happy, safe home
So
and
because
neighborhood.
it's become hypersensitive or overtrained to detect threats and to be on guard, is that why? Is it?
Exactly. And so imagine if you are someone who has an enlarged amygdala, you've become hypervigilant. So if you're a kid
Hmm.
that goes to a coaching session or into a classroom and every day or every second day, 6 days a week, and you don't know where the threat's going to next come from, instead of pouring all your resources, your incredible brain resources into
Hmm.
creativity and innovation and problem solving and learning, you are pouring all your energy into the part of the brain that's going to keep you safe, because the brain's
Hmm.
number one job is to keep you alive. So hypervigilant people, they're always on the lookout. They're like a watchtower. And imagine all that
You
lost.
just described all my SEAL teammates, by the way.
I'm sorry to
Many
hear
of whom had traumatic childhoods, which made us very good at what we did, by the way. Right?
it. Well, and that is exactly the case. And what's exciting to me is you take those teammates and you take the fact that they had these incredibly difficult childhoods, really harmful childhoods. They channeled it into
Hmm.
something powerful and amazing and needed. But
Right.
now they come out of it and they're left with the hurt brain.
That's
And
right.
what I found in the research is you can take a brain like that and you can absolutely repair it. You can take
Yeah.
that person and they don't need to suffer anymore. Once they're in civilian life now, they want to do more. They want to have
Hmm.
healthy, great relationships and not be on perpetual high alert.
Hmm.
Well, that can absolutely be done.
Yeah. I love it. I agree with you. And I've been working with vets now for a few years. And also, um, just because I am a vet and grew up in a traumatic little kind of alcoholic family situation, I said, I better, do a little, tune up myself, right? And preventative maintenance. And so I've been through electrostim, right? I've been through ibogaine treatment. Um, I did Dr. Amon's, brain scan just recently, and supplementation, and of course, all sorts of. I've been meditating and exercising and training in nature, and doing all the right stuff that you talk about in your book. And it's certainly a prescription for us, for our folks to go from good to great. But this is the first time, I think I've ever really discussed this in the context of childhood trauma, bullying trauma, and how important it is. And so let's kind of go back to the the kids. Let's say you're. I mean, how do we know if we've been bullied, or I guess someone just kind of knows, right? I mean, if you've been bullied, you kind of like do most of your clients know they've been bullied, or do some of them still in deep denial about it and be like, oh no, or I overcame that. It wasn't, it's not a big deal. I'm smart. I overcame it. We like to think that we can think our way through anything, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the powerhouse question. And it's something that I only came to terms with through starting to research and write and have lived experience in this world. So what happened was, here's my son. He's this elite athlete and he's being totally destroyed by these two teachers. And I watched the mental health collapse firsthand. And when you watch it and it's someone that you love more than life itself, your kid,
Hmm.
you become really aware of just how traumatizing it is. And he was smart enough. I mean, it was a terrible sacrifice. It was like a deal with the devil. He gave
Mm-hmm.
up playing basketball, which was his absolute joy and passion. And he
Mm.
was so talented. And he walked away because the broken system put the two teachers back. Six boys didn't play that year. That was
Jeez.
our son's final year. And so he knew well enough. He's like, I cannot afford to be exposed to this toxicity.
Good
And
for him.
also, the headmaster at the school, with the assistance of the chaplain and the board, they were all covering up and they were re-victimizing the kids. He broke confidentiality. It was just a horrendous situation. So I'm watching this, and my son was physically and emotionally abused, and it was all about humiliation. And it
Mm-hmm.
started to have this sort of effect on me. It started to trigger me. I was like, what's wrong with me? And so I resigned in protest from that school. As soon as the second my son graduated, I resigned, and I got a job at another private school. And I can only teach at private schools because I have a PhD, not a teaching license through the public system. So I went to another
Mm-hmm.
private school that hired me, and I started teaching. And by that point, I mean, I was exhausted. And then within a year of being, 2 years of being at that school, the whole story was blown out in national news. It was on an
Mm-hmm.
investigative journalist TV program, local news. And I just was done. Like, I was really just emotionally drained as a person. And my focus was on getting our son better. So I'm in my second year at that school. There was an issue with the teacher who was sort of like a really cult following type teacher, just beloved and slated to be the next leader of the school and started the soccer academy. Well, out of the blue, we're all told as faculty that he's been called home from the girls' soccer tour in Germany and he's never allowed on campus again. It's like,
Oh.
mm-hmm.
Uh-oh.
So that was all covered up and brushed under the carpet and swept away. And I had just put my head down. I honestly just couldn't deal with it. I didn't care, but it started to trigger me more. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what's wrong with me? So
Mm.
then in my third year at the school, 17-year-old girl that I taught the year before came up to me and she said, can I talk to you? And, with kids, when you're a teacher, you can just, like a mom, I was like, okay, this does not sound good. And
Right.
so we go outside. This is October 1st, 2017. We go outside, stand outside the library, and she says to me, I'm being sexually harassed by a teacher.
Oh.
I'm like, oh my God. And I wanted to say, well, I'm not the right person. Don't tell me. I can't handle this anymore. I know that the system's completely broken. I'm not going to send you anywhere near a commissioner for teacher regulation. I know they're corrupt. I've handed all the material to ombudsperson's office. I mean, these are the things I want to say. But of course, I say, well, I'm going to help you and we need to do the right thing. I have legal duty to report. We need to deal with this. Now, she was an international student from China and she was living
Mm-hmm.
with her father in her final year. But prior to that, she'd been a homestay student living with the principal of the school and his wife. And the principal of the school was my champion. Totally hired me as a whistleblower. I laid it all out on the table that it was going to go to national news, and I knew that was happening. And these schools are very circle the wagons, very connected, protect one another. And I'm a
Yeah.
pretty the last thing you want is a vocal teacher, one who's not going to look away when
Right.
bad stuff's happening. So he's in his 60s and adult children and just a lovely guy. And so she had stayed with him and his wife for several years. So I said to her, look, how about you and me go and talk to Mr. Calderwood and we will sort this out and deal with this and get it straightened out. And she looks at me and she says, it is Mr. Calderwood.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Oof.
And this is not this what I'm telling you here right now in British Columbia, Canada,
Mm.
where I live, the schools that are up and running is
Mm-hmm.
all completely covered up.
Of course.
Police
Well, you know what?
investigations started,
The
everything.
fact that we're talking about this means this is happening all over the place.
Yeah. And
All
in
over
the
the
research,
place.
I can assure you it is.
I
Child
know
abuse
that.
was recognized as being absolutely rampant
Mm-hmm.
in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
That was Roland Summit's work and Alice Miller. In the 1990s, late 1990s, two American doctors, they identified and made direct correlation. It's considered one of the most important medical breakthroughs, direct correlation between child abuse of all forms, emotional, physical, and sexual, emotional neglect, and physical
Mm-hmm.
neglect. And then they also look at divorce, alcoholism, substance abuse, a parent with mental illness, and
Mm-hmm.
domestic abuse. Those were the 10 things. 5 of them are child abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And they make a direct correlation between child abuse and midlife chronic illness.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That makes sense.
we going back to your question, once the abuser's removed, like this individual was suspended instantly from the school and the police investigation began, once they're removed, therefore the child must be safe. That's our
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And that thinking is outdated. It's not
Mm-hmm.
grounded in science, it's ignorant. So,
Mm-hmm.
what happens with this girl is she sends me, I do everything to support her. She sends me emails over the course of, all the off she goes to university a year later. She's a brilliant kid. She scored the highest on the international baccalaureate exams, wants to be a doctor. She starts synchronized swimming at UBC. She's off the island. Like, I just figure safe, safe, safe. And it feels deeply familiar to me. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
she's away from high school. It's over now. Who cares that everything is, the broken system here. It's over. She's at university. She's going to flourish. So she keeps sending me emails, and they're not good. They're about mental health, about how she's so full of self-loathing. She's ruined his life. She feels that, she wants to hurt herself. She's really looking for drugs. She's very, very suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm deeply concerned. I call the police who was involved, the special victims. I'm like, should I even be writing her? I'm just a teacher. I don't know how to handle this kind of trauma. And she says, you're answering perfectly. Just keep supporting her. That means everything. So in 2017, a student writes me who's close friends with her and just says, our Elisa has taken her life.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And
horrible.
so that for me was the final like breakdown. Now these kinds of strange feelings, memories, flashbacks, traumas, like triggers that I'm having in my own life. Like I'm starting to cry for no reason. I took 3 days stress leave from the school. I was like, what is wrong with me? Becomes full blown panic attacks. And I have to bite the bullet and unpack the fact that, and I knew it, it's not like it was unconscious. It's just that I kept it in a box over here
Mm-hmm.
and I never looked at it. I never opened the box and I knew it was
Mm-hmm.
there. But I was sexually, physically, and emotionally abused in an outdoor education program with 3 teachers
Mm-hmm.
from 13 when the grooming began until I left at 17. So for 4 years. And there were many victims. There's
Mm-hmm.
always many victims. It's never a single. Many
Right.
victims. And they took these guys to court in 2000. I knew that was happening. I was called by national news. Someone must have given them my name. And I said, like, honestly, garbage. I couldn't think of, all I said was like vague things like, oh, I don't even know what I said. All I remember is being on the telephone and feeling like I was in a haze. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
really there. And that's what happens when you're an abuse victim. You
Mm-hmm.
become almost like a ghost in your own life and you
Mm-hmm.
don't know why. And I
You
mean
just
now
disassociate from that whole part
you
of your
dissociate.
personality. Yeah.
You absolutely dissociate. So what's been fabulous for me and what's been super powerful about this book is it's a book I wrote to look at, okay, so this happened to me. It's happening to lots of kids. What can we do to get better? And really
Right.
what I found in the neuroscience is there are so many things and they're, as you say, they're exactly what you're doing. There's so much research to back up that once you identify, yeah, my brain is being hurt, now I need to repair it, so that you commit to
Yeah.
it. So I
Yeah.
spent time in the book really showing that, like, what has happened to your brain. It's
Right.
not in your head, it really is there. It's brain architecture issues.
Right. Right.
Once you see that, then my whole goal is to do the exercise and the meditation and
Mm-hmm.
all of that type of work. Being in nature is a huge one, as you
Mm-hmm.
know, but also getting people to use mindfulness as a tool, like an athlete would visualize, to visualize their brain and to
Mm-hmm.
start talking and working with their brain, telling their
Yeah, that's
brain,
cool. I
brain to
love that.
stand down, basically.
Yeah.
Like your mind is saying to your brain, you're the power, but I'm in the driver's seat and I can tell you we're safe. You can calm down. That's what you're telling your brain when you do deep breathing. You're telling
Right.
your brain there isn't a predator around. It can calm
Right.
down.
Right. I love that you use the term body, mind, brain, or mind, body, brain, which I don't know if it matters what order, but I talk about the mind body, and of course I look at the brain as part of the body, but I like that you pull it out as a separate thing because it's so important. You could add the heart to that, by the way, too. Body, heart, brain, mind.
Yes.
But because it's all just different aspects of our being. The mind being most important because the mind is the architect, right? And so if you poison the mind, then the brain will then go into distress, and so will the body, and it'll end up as disease and you know all these things that you're talking about. So in your work, especially with well, it's not just younger because I mean you're right about my age, and so your healing started when you finally had that kind of wake up call, like holy shit, this isn't just about these victims, this is about me. So you're never too late to do healing, whether you're 20 or 55. But in your work, is there a like best to start here place? Because like let me just give you a reference point. In our work, what we find is if people come to us and they're like really out of shape physically, it's very hard to work with their mind, right? So it's hard to go in and do kind of the emotional, what we call the emotional mountain work if they're physically really out of balance. So we say, okay, let's just start with some fundamentals here. Get your body back into balance. So we're going to sleep better, we're going to eat better, we're going to we start moving the body, and movement, our view is similar to yours, like move in nature, do some somatic movement, breathe and move, and then exercise is something different. We'll train our body to be functionally strong. And those things, and then that basically starts to bring a little homeostasis back, and then we can start to work with things like mindfulness and visualization, and then of course what I love is you're saying also the objective interventions of like take a look at your brain with an EEG, QEG, or some other map like Dr. Amen has his little thing, spectrogram or something, and see what's going on, and then we can be a little bit more precise like a sniper with our interventions. So at any rate, is it do everything all at once, or do you have kind of like a prescription, a progressive path to healing?
Well, in the book, what I do is I make people understand and look at the really tough research, the painful research on what abuse does to the brain. And then every single chapter has okay, that's the bad news. Let's talk about activation.
Right.
So, just like in your program, I do the same thing where I say you have to start with basic principles of brain health, organic
Mm-hmm.
brain health. And it's the same thing as with the body. You can't go to the doctor and say, I need you to get me in shape. You go to the
Right.
doctor when you need really like important intervention, very specific,
Yeah,
very geared
something's gone off
towards
the
your
rails already.
something's
Right.
not right. Same thing with the mental health professional. But if you bring to your mental health professional an organic brain health basis, you're going to do so much better. So one
Mm-hmm.
of the things I try to get people to understand is you learn these principles of brain health, and they are just like the body, of course, because people, I mean, in our society, we don't think about the brain as part of the body. I mean, if you even look at the law, the law, like if you punched me in the face, the law would, that would be a criminal charge. If you humiliated me, the law would be like, well, that's not our department. The body looks fine to me. She must be okay. She'll get over it. She's got hurt
Right.
feelings, you know? But
Yeah.
in actual fact, you've just damaged my brain.
Right.
So, and if you repeat that humiliation over and over, you're doing more and more harm to my brain.
Mm-hmm.
You're ramping up my toxic stress levels, which is pumping up cortisol. Cortisol is a corrosive stress hormone.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to be
Mm-hmm.
healthy, and it is in healthy situations, like you need to run away from a predator or an assailant, but
And
it's
in
not
small quantities. Yeah.
in small quantities in a big
Yeah.
rush. But our
Right.
kids and us as adults, we're living in a world where our brains are constantly being bathed in this corrosive stress hormone. It's
Mm-hmm.
really, really awful. And our body is too. It affects your blood vessels. This is why, seeing chronic health issues is hardly a surprise. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that for us, it's all sort of invisible. So in my program, I want people to understand that the brain is just like a muscle. You need to start by getting the muscle healthy. Just like the heart, you need to start working slowly with the heart. You can't go from sitting on the couch watching TV to running 5 miles. That would be
Mm-hmm.
really unhealthy. You have to take small incremental steps, and just as you would get your muscles slowly but surely stronger and stronger and motivate you to do that, you are doing the exact same activation energy with your brain. You're getting the neural networks that you desire, the
Mm-hmm.
ones for empathy, the ones for critical thinking, the ones for caring for other people, all these things, problem solving, intelligence, understanding, all of that is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And you have to do it in steps. And I'm just the same
Hmm.
as you with, you need a baseline.
Right.
You've got to choose health basically. And we feed our brains really bad food. Anyone who's
Hmm.
eating fast food is feeding their brain. And our kids, no kid should ever be eating fast food. It's the worst
Hmm.
thing for your brain.
Hmm.
But our society doesn't talk enough about the brain. So this is why in my book, Bullied Brain, I'm trying to be like, a powerful bullying tool is to ignore something. Well, we're all ignoring our own brains, and we have to.
Hmm. We're bullying our own brains.
Yeah,
That's
it's
interesting.
true. Um,
Yeah.
Something I was going to say about strengthening. Oh, yes, this is a great thing that really makes an impression on people. So the first point of this is people need to understand that right until the last moment you're on the planet, you can strengthen or weaken your brain. It's your
Hmm.
choice, right?
Hmm.
We have neuroplasticity or brain plasticity until our last moment on the planet. We have it very intensively when we're in our teens to 24.
Hmm.
That's an
Hmm.
incredible time, just like 0 to 5. Incredible time in neuroplasticity, but we have it right till the end. So it's always a choice. You can always choose what you want to do for your physical health and your brain health. And as you say, they're
Hmm.
entwined. And so here are all the Dr. Michael Merzenich, who is my just absolute, he took this project under his wing, even though he's one of the most sought after, most important, most awarded neuroscientists alive today. And he's American, amazing guy in San Francisco. He was telling me that, there they are in the lab and they're doing all this work on brain research and they've developed this incredible program and it's really important for brain training and it can help elderly people not get sort of a flaccid falling apart brain. We keep our bodies alive until many 80s and 90s,
Hmm.
but we let our brains go. We don't
Hmm.
keep exercising them in the correct neuroscientific trained way to keep them healthy. So there they are working on Alzheimer's and all this research into brain training and they get a telephone call and it's Alex Guerrero, who is Tom Brady, the quarterback's trainer. And he's just
Hmm.
like, hey, just wanted to let you guys know, you guys do know that Tom uses your brain training every day.
Nice.
And they were like, no. So they all got on a plane, the neuroscientists, and they went over to watch him and see him do his training and find out what this was all about. And so Tom Brady is the first professional athlete that's gone public and shared his big competitive edge, which is that he trains his brain as much as he trains his body. Here he is in his 40s competing with 22-year-old brains and
Hmm.
outperforming them. Now that
Oh,
could
by
be
the way,
all
it's
of
a
that.
good idea for a contact sport athlete
Yeah,
to be training their brain and
yeah,
doing lots of healing of their brain, whether it's
yeah,
football, soccer, or Navy SEAL,
exactly.
because of the micro trauma. Yeah, of
and also
TBI.
and also actual traumatic brain injury from all kinds
Right.
of things, not just the
That's right.
PTSD or
Right.
PTS. And the brain training program, the extensive research on it by all kinds of independent like Johns Hopkins and UCLA and those types of people, they show that even traumatic brain injury can undergo incredible repair.
Is that training program similar to like a Lumosity type thing where you're doing like agility drills with your brain and visualization and solving problems and speed drills, or how does that look?
Yeah, it's online gamified. The only difference would be that Brain HQ, which is Michael Merzenich's program, is
Hmm.
it's got the research behind it. There's lots of
Yeah.
different programs out there, but they can't show that so for example, you think of a kid playing a video game. They get really,
Hmm.
really good at the video game, but it doesn't translate into real life.
Right.
Same thing with brain training programs that are out there. The difference
Hmm.
with Brain HQ is it translates into real life. So Tom Brady playing football is having the benefits of the type of training designed by the neuroscientist that he does with Brain HQ.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So you got to get the body brain healthy through exercise, nutrition, hydration, sleep. You got to get the mind healthy through self awareness that bullying is bad. Bullying equals bad, and is going to really hurt you at some point, and it's holding you back, right? So that looks a lot like therapy and coaching, life coaching, or just self awareness and healing, from the codependency and the other psychological dysfunctions that accrue from that, because those are pretty significant and they keep you trapped. And then we step it up and we say, okay, now we train our brain. We train our brain through these tools such as you're talking about with Brain HQ and visualization. And what else can we do to train our brain?
Well, what I found through my own journey, which I think is one of the most important discoveries, is we know people who know that getting physically fit is going to make them healthier and happier, and they
Hmm.
don't do it.
That's true.
So my biggest struggle in the book was I learned all this academic material, which is what I do. I did a deep dive into the neuroscience and the medicine and the research. So I knew everything. But after my student committed suicide, I could not bring myself to do anything. I
Yeah.
sat on the couch and I honestly was immobilized.
It's called depression.
It's called depression, and it was pretty
Hmm.
terrible. And what I found was I couldn't stop my legs from shaking, which is what happened to me when I was a kid. When I was being abused by those teachers, I had such extreme anxiety that my body was quivering. Now,
Right.
that should remind you of an animal. That's what
Hmm.
animals do when they're terrified. If a dog is
Hmm.
terrified, it will start to shake. And
Hmm.
so, of course, me being the absolute nerd that I am, I went to try and find the research on it, and I found it. And what I found was it's called panic. And when you're in a state of panic, basically your brain it thinks it's the end. And this is the most important piece, I think, of the whole book. Because what I realized is when you're that much full of fear, you align with the abuser.
Hmm.
You identify with the aggressor. So if you
Like
just
the
think of
Stockholm syndrome,
Stockholm
sort of.
syndrome. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what I'd done with the teachers. I didn't
Interesting.
open the box because as soon as you open the box, you have a personal responsibility to yourself to say, I have been damaged. And you have a personal responsibility to say, I must report this to protect others. If you don't open the
Hmm.
box, you can align with the aggressor because that's so much safer for the brain. The brain's like, why would you mess with those guys? Those guys
Yeah,
are
it almost feels easier, and you get into this codependent. Well, it's not my responsibility to ruin their lives by outing them. Someone else can do that, right?
and
Because that
really
might ruin my life. Because then they're going to deny it, and then I've got to, I can see how that psychologically could be really challenging.
well, and
Definitely,
the truth of it is you're afraid of them. I
that's it.
had to
That's right.
I had to recognize, and I'm a pretty like, you know, don't mess with me. I stand tall, I stand strong. But the truth of it was, I was just on the inside in my brain, an absolutely terrorized individual. And I was
Hmm.
afraid for my son, and I was afraid for myself. And so what I had to do was I had to face how afraid I was. And the way I did it, and this is a Dan Siegel thing, I'm sure you've read his
Hmm.
mindfulness books and work. Um, you have to name it to tame it.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I took that one step further and I started speaking the names of my abusers. I went and
Oof.
read all the news clippings, I read all the court documents, I read all the Ministry of Education and how hard they tried to cover it up, just like they do today, 40 years later. It's like, I just faced it and I say their names, my three abusers, the three teachers, as often as I feel. I put them in my book. I just say their names. I
What are
have
their names?
no their names are Dean Hull, Stan Calgary, and Tom Ellison. Tom Ellison was charged and convicted. Dean Hull admitted in court to sleeping or having sex repeatedly with a teenage girl who was my contemporary and wasn't charged even. And Stan Calgary was not charged, but they all should be charged. They all should be in jail. Basically, they're dangerous individuals. That it's not like it's if you don't ever get held accountable as an abusive individual, you can never heal. You never can get
Hmm.
better. It's actually a curse. And if you want
Hmm.
to talk about damaged brains, we should be so worried about any child that's bullying. That kid does not need punishment or discipline or some sort of
Right.
stern talking to. They're
Right.
not a bad
He
child.
needs intervention and healing. Right.
They need intervention and healing. That is the behavior of a very traumatized child. And all they're doing is reinforcing the trauma by they're just obviously in fight mode. So they're fighting to survive. They think they're under threat. And obviously they are under threat in their lives, or they would not be doing that.
Wow. So true. And if a bully doesn't get healed, he'll always be a bully. I have someone in mind when I say that I happen to know very well.
You could give him my book and see if it shakes him out of it.
Well, I don't think my father would be reading your books, even though he's pretty strong and he reads all the time, but he reads trashy novels. And he doesn't listen to my podcasts. If he does, I love you, Dad. It's a long shot, though. My point is that bullying, yeah, if you don't heal from that, it shows up in different ways throughout your life as the
Well,
bully, right? And not necessarily as the victim. I mean, as the bully. And the victim, it's going to, the disease or the imbalance will show up as disease or as psychological trauma or you know the unfortunate victim of suicide, like you said with your Chinese friend.
well, what's interesting to me about your father is, um, it's intergenerational.
That's right.
So, my husband's
he
father,
was he was bullied by his father.
of course, you just pass
Yeah.
it on. And it goes back to a question that you asked at the beginning. And it's this idea, and this is what really worries me about society right now, because the brain will normalize everything as a way to, it creates its own reality. So, we tend to think that the brain is reacting to things.
Hmm.
So if you hurt my feelings, I react by my eyes fill with tears. But that's actually not true. What's happening in the brain is, you're about to hurt my feelings, or you hurt my feelings. My brain looks at that and it goes, have we seen this before? And really looks
Hmm.
fast, like lightning speed at my experience. And it
Hmm.
goes through the filing cabinet. It's like, oh, when someone says a mean thing, it hurts you. I think the proper emotion concept for this moment, let's pull out the file folder for hurt. Yeah, fill your eyes with tears. Perfect. Did it. So
Hmm.
it's creating its reality. Now, as soon as you know that, you can take a mindfulness stance to this and create a little bit of space between stimulus and response, like what I
Hmm.
see you doing with your father. You
Hmm.
aren't reacting with hurt to your father. You've chosen to be amused.
Hmm.
You're like,
That's right.
oh, love you, Dad. You can't take love away from me. I'll never stop loving you. I chose the path of love. That's what I'm
Hmm.
like. People in my world. You were shaped the way you were, and you stuck with it and kept those neural networks. I didn't, and so I chose the emotion concept for you make me laugh.
Hmm. I love that. And by the way, you're touching upon the most powerful training tool of all, and that's forgiveness and humor. Humor is up there too, but forgiveness first, right?
I have
Because
a
if you
hard
can't
time.
it's tough,
I
but
have a
if you
hard
can't,
time with forgiveness. I don't know
I
why
know
I can't do it.
forgiveness is hard. Like for me, I didn't play the victim, but for a long time I was just like kind of pissed. And I went to this program called the Hoffman process. It's all about overcoming negative love syndrome from childhood trauma. It's a week of just intense therapy and visualization, and it's a process, right? And one of the visualizations, and these are long, intense visualizations that last for hours, right? Is I went back and had to visualize my parents as children, and I saw things that I've never seen before, that I have no business knowing, but I saw things. I saw how they were raised, and I saw my father getting abused and bullied. And man, it just was an immediate release. I was like, oh, right. He didn't have it. He had a choice as an adult to get help and to go through his own healing, but he didn't. So this wasn't his path, I guess, in this lifetime. But it allowed me to release any kind of victimhood and to forgive him. And what a difference from going from an adult who's done a ton of therapy, who really understood that I was okay but hadn't forgiven, to being able to forgive him and actually verbalize to him for the first time that I love him. He still never said it back, but isn't it interesting? I mean, it's just so I'm a firm believer that the highest form of healing comes from forgiving oneself and forgiving others. It doesn't mean you have to be in relationship with them or like them or be okay with what happened.
Mhm.
Forgiveness is love in action, and just extending that to everyone in the universe. You're only giving it back to yourself, because whatever you give out is basically you're leaving a carbon copy on yourself.
Yeah, that is the best description I've ever heard of how to do it, because it's a stumbling block for me.
Hmm.
I can't forgive those teachers, and I think part of it for me is I find it hard to forgive when the person does not acknowledge what they've done, when
I
there's no
understand. totally.
ability.
Yeah, my
It's like,
father's the
how do
same
you,
way. He doesn't have a clue how much he's hurt people and doesn't care. But hey, that's his life.
yeah.
Your life is your life, and you want to be free. And so, if you want absolute freedom, then forgiveness is the only path.
Yeah, no, the way you say it makes me, I just want to start visualizing my
There you go.
abusive
That,
teachers.
well,
And
that'll be
you
in
know
your
what I
next
love
book.
about that too?
When you complete that step, you'll write the next book.
You know, what I actually have written the next book, and
Good.
it's going to be one that I hope really interests you in particular, because I compared two things. So what I call it is Cloud of False Echoes,
Nice.
and then the subtitle is Trust the Truth and Resist Madness.
Oh, cool.
And I feel like it's a timely book because we are suffering right now in an era where there's a war on truth.
That's right.
And really, like, I want to write in defense of the truth and how it's so important. And so I compare and contrast, I juxtapose um, the emails of my student, which is a document or it's evidence of a brain that is slowly but surely being turned mad.
Hmm.
She's becoming completely mentally ill, and it's documented in these emails because of the system and what they do to her and her
Right.
brain. So I have that, and then I juxtapose it with, I was asked as a researcher to look at these writings by a World War II fighter pilot. He's actually a Canadian fighter pilot who bombed the bridge on the River Kwai.
Mm.
And so I look at his clarity of mind. He's in this massively traumatizing
Hmm.
situation, going out from India and traveling to Japan repeatedly in these, planes and
Hmm.
dropping bombs and what it means to be dropping bombs on people and all these sorts of things. And his life is at risk every single time they get in that plane. And yet his clarity of mind is the most brilliant contrast to my student's madness.
Hmm.
And he comes home
Hmm.
and she doesn't.
Hmm.
And I feel like it's a really powerful way to understand that we might have our opinions, we might have our political beliefs, we might have any of these differences and ideas about how to go forward and what's important and best, but we have to respect the truth.
Hmm. That's right. And the truth is your truth. And so to get to the ultimate truth inside of you, you got to overcome the traumas that obscure the truth from you, both
The cloud of
physiologically and
false echoes.
yeah, the cloud of false echoes. I love that. I can't wait to see that book and read and have a conversation about it. You've been just such a delightful guest, Jennifer. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your work and conversation and your open-hearted way and humble way that you're able to talk about even your experience with your son and your own and this tragic incident with this Chinese lady. Wow, it's a great conversation. Thanks so much.
Well,
And so
thank you for having
your
me.
your book Bully Brain, is this a recent it's a recent publication, so it's out in the market now.
It's out in it just came out in April in the US, so it's
Okay.
still in a hardcover edition. You
Check.
can get it audio obviously in Kindle, but yeah, that's why it's sort of hardcover,
Yep.
that first edition business. Yeah, it just came out in April, and I'm just hopeful that it brings healing. And I'm thinking something that you said that's so important too about freedom and about forgiveness is when you take that path, you can also forgive yourself when you let yourself down, when you're
Hmm.
less than perfect, when you're hurtful to others,
Hmm.
even people you love so much. We all make those mistakes.
Of
We all
course.
do things wrong. And if you forgive others, then you can hold some of that self compassion for
That's right.
yourself.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
agree with you. It's very important work in an age that's slightly mad. So we'll continue to do that. This is awesome and so important. We'll just continue what we're doing and helping to educate people on the importance of healthy body, mind, brain, and being the change that we want to see in the world. And we can do that at scale with podcasts like this.
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving me this incredible opportunity to connect with you and learn.
yeah, it's been my pleasure. Where can people connect with you? besides the book?
My website, my website is Bullied Brain,
Okay.
same as the title of the book. So
.com,
everything,
bulletbrain.com.
there's lots of free resources like articles and interviews, and I write for Psychology Today, and
Mm-hmm.
anything if people want to learn more about these sorts of issues and what the neuroscience is saying, there's tons of stuff on the website, and it also tells you where you can get the book.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank
Be
you.
well. Take care.